Your podcast is a powerful tool that serves your audience and your business. But how do you manage it all, bring in new listeners, and convert those listeners into customers? That's what this show is all about. Welcome to Podcasting for Educators. I'm Sarah Whitaker, classroom teacher turned podcast manager, and I'm here to help you get the most out of your show, all while making an impact on other educators. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Podcasting for Educators. Today, I am going to be talking about a topic that I've gotten a lot of questions about recently because I've been talking about it a little bit on Instagram, and that is why I changed my podcast host to a platform called Captivate. Now, Captivate has so many cool features, and I'm really excited to tell you about them today and just tell you a little bit about why I decided to switch and how I have been liking Captivate since I've switched over to them. But before, I want to do something I haven't done in a while, and that is read a review that was left for this show on Apple Podcasts. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate when you all leave these reviews. They totally make my day, and if you're a podcaster, I'm sure that you feel the same way when you see that you've gotten a new review as well. It's like a sign that people are listening out there. So this review is from Lauren Tingle. It's titled Obsessed with This Podcast. She says, I tune in every week to Sarah's episodes because her episodes are super practical. I loved podcasts to begin with, but Sarah's strategies and tools have inspired me to start and run my own podcast. Her voice is easy to listen to, and her content is encouraging and full of value. Thank you for all your hard work for this niche. Thank you so much, Lauren, and especially for your comment about my voice, because I think we all hate the way that our voice sounds. So talk about a confidence booster. Thank you, Lauren. And if you are a fan of this show and it's helping you in any way, I would love it if you would head to Apple Podcasts and write a review so that anybody who stumbles upon this podcast can see these reviews and see if it's a show that they're interested in listening to. All right, moving on. So like I said at the beginning of this episode, a few months ago, I switched my podcast host. And let's back up a little bit. If you are not familiar at all with what a podcast host is, a podcast host is where you host your podcast. Just like you have a host for your website, you need a host for your podcast. And so this is where you go to initially set up your show, and it's where you go every single week to upload your newest episodes, and then your host shoots your episode out to all of the other listening apps like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all of the other places. If you have yet to start your podcast and you're listening to this to kind of get some ideas on which platforms you should be using, one of the biggest questions I get from people is, do I have to put my episode on all of those different listening platforms every single week? And the answer is no. You only need to put them in one place, and that's your host. And then your host will put them everywhere else. Your host is also where you go to find your downloads and find all of the stats involved with your podcast. So your host is a very important piece of your podcast. And to be honest, if you had asked me about podcast hosting a couple of years ago, I would have said, they're all pretty much the same. There's a few that I would stay away from. There's a few that I would recommend, but they all kind of level out. There's no like big things that set them apart. Well, as we know, podcasting evolves all of the time. And in the past year or so, there's definitely been a lot of changes. And now the newer podcast hosts are really starting to level up podcast hosting and include some new cool features that do set them apart from other hosts. And I am not here to knock any platforms or knock any kind of podcasting host. So if you've been listening to me for a while, you probably already know who I was hosting with before. But the main reason why I initially started thinking about switching hosts is because the host that I was with before they did a big update back in I think it was spring of 2022. And it came with a lot of glitches, and there were several times that my episodes were not being published as they should have been, even though they were scheduled to go out. They didn't. A lot of times this happened with my client's podcast as well, which was very frustrating because that's supposed to be the easy part, right? Having your host actually push the episodes out. And it wasn't. So I got frustrated along with some other issues that I'm not really going to get into, but that was kind of the starting point that made me think about switching hosts. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized another reason I really wanted to try out a different hosting platform is because I teach people about podcasting and about their options for podcasting. And so I wanted to have that experience to be able to give recommendations. I have clients on several different hosting platforms, but at the time I did not have a client on Captivate, but I had heard really amazing things about it. So I decided to sign up and give it a try. Now, before I jump into the key features that I want to tell you about, I want to just tell you this. I know that you have got so much to do. You've got so much on your plate, and I don't want you to listen to this episode and feel like you have to run and switch your podcast host. Because if you're happy with where you're hosting, then just stay there. There's no reason to feel like you need to put another thing on your plate to do. But I just wanted to do this episode so that you know some of the available features that are out there in case you ever do want to make a switch. So just so that you have the information about what some of these features are that some hosts have that maybe yours doesn't. So then you can then take that information and make your decision. But I don't want this to be like a shiny object situation where you're like, oh, that sounds so cool. Now I need to go and switch. That's not my goal here. But if you're somebody who hasn't started your podcast yet and you are considering which host to go with, this is my top recommendation right now, and that is Captivate. So let's look at some of the reasons that I do love Captivate so much. Number one is that they offer the ability to do dynamic ads. And this is really one of the main reasons that I wanted to try out Captivate specifically, is because they have this feature. Now, if you haven't heard me talk about dynamic ads before, dynamic ads are a type of ad that you can put in your podcast, but what sets them apart is that sometimes when you have an ad, maybe you record your ad and you put it in the middle of your episode, and it's only in that one episode. It's in any episodes that you actually include that ad in while you're editing your episode. And it stays in there unless you were to go in and take it out manually. Well, dynamic ads are more automated, and they are great for any kind of announcement or promotion of something that is more time sensitive and not as evergreen as maybe some of your other offers. So with a dynamic ad, you can actually sit down and you can record your ad, and then you can upload that ad into Captivate. And they have an ads management section in there where you can go in and with one click of a button, you can push apply to all episodes, and it will put that ad inside all of those episodes. Now, typically I use this as a pre-roll, which means it's the very first thing that people hear. So when I upload that ad, I click that button, and now it's on all of my episodes from episode 1 to my most current episode. Anybody who listens, so if somebody discovers my podcast for the first time while this ad is running and they're listening to episode 1 or they're listening to episode 15 or episode 50, no matter which one they're on, they're going to hear that pre-roll ad. And it took me 5 seconds to get it up there. It's really cool. So you can imagine that these types of ads are great for like an upcoming event that you're holding. Maybe you're hosting a webinar or a training. They are also great for any kind of live launch that you're doing. So maybe you have an online course, the doors are open for 1 week. You could have this dynamic pre-roll ad running all week long in all of your episodes to make sure that anybody who's listening is going to be aware that you have your doors open for your course. Any kind of TPT sale, if there's a 24-hour TPT sale, you can put a dynamic ad up and get that up real quickly. You can also use this to talk about any kind of lead magnet you have. Maybe you have a seasonal lead magnet that really wouldn't make sense to be in all of your episodes, but you could put it out there during the time of year that people would be most likely to want to buy it. And you can also use this for announcements. For example, I did an episode when I was celebrating International Podcasting Day, where I wanted you to send in voice messages using an app called SpeakPipe and to share about your podcast on this voice message. And so I did a dynamic pre-roll ad where I was announcing that I was doing this and I was asking you to leave your voice messages. So that was more of an announcement versus like a sales promotion kind of thing. So lots of cool uses for this and very easy and very quick to do. So honestly, the fact that dynamic ads is offered through Captivate, that feature alone is enough to make me want to switch to Captivate. Now, Buzzsprout is another podcast host who offers dynamic ads in their like basic plans, just like Captivate does. And the other cool thing with dynamic ads is that, and I'm kind of like nerding out here, but hopefully you find this as cool as I do. But if you have a dynamic ad that you put up, so let's go back to that example of me saying, hey, I want you to leave a voice message for this podcast. You can, when you upload your dynamic ad, you can actually put the link to, like I put the link to where people can leave their voice messages. You upload that link, any kind of call to action link with that ad, and it will automatically apply it to the show description of any episode that has that ad attached to it. How cool is that? I just think that's so cool. All right, podcasters, you know how many details come with producing just a single episode, and using the right tools is the key to creating high quality episodes in the most efficient way possible. One of my absolute favorite tools I use is Zencastr. I have tried so many different platforms for recording my guest interviews, and Zencastr is the one I've stuck with for so many reasons. It always gives me the highest quality audio because there is nothing worse than recording an episode that you can't use because of bad quality. It's so easy for you and your guests, even the not so tech savvy ones. All they have to do is click a link and we start recording. Boom, done. Plus, the video is crystal clear so you can repurpose your solo and your guest episodes on social media and on YouTube. Oh, and it gives you a transcript of your episodes. You can go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code EDUCATORS. You'll get 30% off your first 3 months of Zencastr Professional. I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all of my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. So go to zencastr.com/pricing. That's zencastr.com/pricing and use my code EDUCATORS for 30% off. That's educators, all lowercase letters. The link will also be in the show notes. Second thing that's really cool, and this is more of like, maybe you care about this, maybe you don't. But I just think the whole like back end of it, the interface of it is very visually appealing. It's very clean. And I really like the look of it. So maybe that matters to you. Maybe it doesn't, but it makes me happy when I log in and see what it looks like. The third thing is that you can create what they call blocks for your episode descriptions. So like I have an evergreen block, and that's where I go in one time and I create this block where I have like evergreen links. So maybe it's to follow me on Instagram or to sign up for my online course, the prep school. Whatever links that are evergreen CTAs that you would want in all of your episode descriptions, you can create a block for it. And then anytime that you upload a new episode and you're writing your episode description, you can just, with the click of a button, say, apply this block, and it will automatically be added. So you don't have to type things out constantly. You don't have to copy and paste things. It's just already there for you. Captivate also gives you the ability to have link tracking. So if you wanted to see, okay, how many people are clicking on this link for my lead magnet because they listen to my podcast, because it's in my episode description, you can set up a trackable link for that. So you can actually see how many people are clicking on that link, which is super cool. The next feature that I love is I love their episode player. And what I mean by this is the player that you put on your show notes page on your website that allows people to actually play that episode on your show notes page. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, you can go look at mine. It's at the top of all of my show notes pages at podcastingforeducators.com/episode episode 69. That would be the page for this episode. So with their players, you can customize the colors, like you can customize the background color of the player, the text color, the play button, all of those things just to fit your branding. So you can put your brand colors in there and all of that. You also have the ability to add CTAs on that player that are clickable. So if you have like an evergreen lead magnet, you could have that link, that button on all of your players. Okay, next up is that Captivate actually has a guest booking system inside of the host. So if you want to kind of keep everything in your host, you can use that guest booking system. You can set your availability, and then the guests would go in and they would put their name, and it has a place for them to put their bio, their headshot, all of their social links, website links, all of that stuff. And then the cool thing is that when you actually go to publish that episode, you can choose the guest that is on that episode, and it will automatically include all of that information in your episode description and then in your show notes with the click of a button. So it'll already be there for you. It will transfer it from that booking into your episode description. Okay, next feature that I love is that you can create collections inside of Captivate. So you can use collections for like if you have a series that you do, or if you have you can create a collection of episodes that are all on a similar topic. So for example, I could create a collection on all of my episodes about like growth strategies for your podcast. And then it gives you an embed code that you can actually embed into your show notes page on your website. So maybe you have an episode that fits in that collection. And on your show notes page, you can say, hey, if you liked this episode, you would probably love these other episodes. And they would be embedded right there on your show notes, all of the players in this nice little like scroll box where they can scroll down and see all of those episodes in the collection. This would also be a really cool thing to include in your newsletter, because whenever you create a collection, it gives you the option to get the embed code or to get a share link. So that share link is something that you could put in your newsletters. Another way to use this would be like at the end of the month, you could create a collection for all of your episodes that month and send out a newsletter with that collection. All right. Are you ready for the next cool feature on Captivate? When you get an account on Captivate, it also comes with a private podcast feed. It's included with your plan. So maybe you don't have an idea on how you can use a private podcast yet, but it's there for you when you're ready to. I've done a couple episodes on private podcasting. I'll link them in the show notes that you can check out if you're not familiar with what a private podcast is, but it's pretty cool to have that option. Typically, I use Hello Audio for private podcasting, and I still do, even though I have Captivate, because I have multiple private podcasts. I have one for my online course, and then I have another one that I use as a lead magnet, and I'm going to keep both of those on Hello Audio. But if I ever want to create another lead magnet with a private podcast, or if I want to do like a training or something like that, I have that private podcast that I can use within Captivate. And then lastly, they have an incredible support team. And I really think that customer service is a really important piece of any platform that you are using for your business. I have transferred a few of my clients over to Captivate, and anytime that there's been any kind of issue, they have been fantastic and super responsive. They have like a live chat feature on there. Somebody always gets back to me right away. And they also have a great Facebook group community as well that is super active. So again, great customer service can be a game changer, especially when it involves something as important as your podcast. Okay, so what do you think? Sounds pretty awesome, right? Lots of cool features that a lot of the other podcast hosts just don't have. And going back to my initial kind of warning in the beginning, do not feel like you have to go and immediately switch your podcast host. But if some of these features sound really cool to you, then I would definitely encourage you to try this. So I will leave a link in the episode description and in my show notes for this that you can use to grab a 7-day free trial. So you can kind of poke around in there, get a feel for things. It is an affiliate link, which means that if you choose to go with Captivate and you end up purchasing with them, I will get a very small commission at absolutely no additional cost to you. This is a really great way to show your support for the free content that I provide on this podcast. And I just want you to know that I would never, ever promote a product or a resource that I do not personally use and love. And I have to tell you, I absolutely love Captivate. So I'm excited to share it with you. And I'm also happy to answer any questions that you have about it. So that link will be in my show notes for this episode. Now, before we wrap this episode up today, you might be wondering, well, I'm already hosting with somebody else, but I want to switch to Captivate. What happens if I switch? What does that process look like? To put it simply, it is not a complicated process at all. It's actually very simple and it's very fast. When you sign up for Captivate, the first thing you'll see is it'll give you an option to either start a new show or to transfer your show. So if you are transferring from another host, you would click that and it's going to walk you through. There's only like 2 or 3 steps that you have to take, and it is almost immediate. It's essentially a redirect from your old host, and your listeners will not notice any kind of difference. It's not going to affect like who's subscribed to your show or anything like that. They will have no idea that you have switched hosts. And again, Captivate really walks you through exactly how to do that. It has a whole like FAQs page about it. So all the information you need will be on there. But I like to tell people that there are 2 things that you need to keep in mind before switching. And that is, number 1, that your downloads are not going to transfer. So if you follow my advice and keep a spreadsheet of your downloads, then this won't be a problem. But if you have not been tracking your downloads at all, most hosts will let you go ahead and export your stats. So if you're going to leave your current host, you can export your stats, save it in your Google Drive or wherever, and then you'll just pick up with new stats in Captivate. Now, I also just want to remind you that nobody sees your stats but you. So if that's like painful to think about, that you're going to be kind of starting from what seems like 0, it's really not. You still have all of your stats from your other host. And again, nobody's going to see that. So that's one thing. The other thing is that you will need to update your episode players on your website. So if you have been doing show notes and you have your episode players on your show notes page, you will need to update those with the new Captivate players. Usually this can be done in like under an hour. All right. Hopefully this answered any questions that you have about hosting with Captivate. And like I said, if you have any questions at all, definitely reach out to me on Instagram at Podcasting for Educators, and I'm happy to answer them. Again, that link to sign up for your free 7-day trial will be in the episode description and in the show notes for this episode at podcastingforeducators.com/episode 69. Thanks so much for tuning in today, and I'll see you next week. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. To keep this conversation going, connect with me on Instagram at Podcasting for Educators. I'm always looking for an excuse to talk about podcasting. If you're looking for support in launching, managing, or growing your podcast, check out my online course, the Podcasting for Educators Prep School, at podcastingforeducators.com/prep school. I'll see you here next time.